So welcome to Leverage a Common Data Model to Build More Powerful Business Apps. Oh, that's a really long title. My name is John O'Luck. I'm the Group Program Manager for the Common Data Service.
I'm Peter Willitsen. I work with the CDS SDK and a few other things as well.
And so we've got about 50 minutes, a ton of content to cover. We'll tease you with a little bit of what we got, what's coming. We'll show you the SDK as
Absolutely.
well. We're going to be at Ask the Experts throughout the rest of the day today as well as tomorrow. So if there are scenarios you want to talk about that are specific to what you're looking at, please feel free to swing by. We've got preview programs with an email address at the end to sign up. So we want to engage with you. We'd love to hear from you. So there will be plenty of opportunity.
So one of the logistical things we need to get out of the way is if you have questions, please step up to the microphones and yeah, do that. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with we'll start with what is the Common Data Service, give you a little peek at where we are, and then we'll talk about where we're going next. And in the context of that, we're a little light on demo just because of the time, but we will make sure we talk about building apps on top of the CDS and a sneak peek at some of the SDK capabilities.
You bet.
All right. So we've spent a lot of time in the past 6 to 9 months talking with customers. What are you building? How do you build it? What does your company look like? What are you trying to do? And what it boils down to is pictures kind of like this. Now, folks in the room here, how many of you would classify yourselves as an analyst? You're building reports on top of data. How many of you also deal with bringing that data together, managing some of that infrastructure? Okay. And then how many of you hate that part of your job or spend so much time on it you can't get the rest of your stuff done, right? I see nods in the audience. That's the reality of the world. There are multiple separate systems all over the place. They're often kind of domain-centric, right? You have a system of record for your HR, system of record for finance, and apps all around them. Power BI, so this Data Insight Summit, that was the first wave of self-service, sort of letting everyone get to the information they need, right? And to do that, people brought data together. They deployed all kinds of technology, some of them Microsoft, some of them not, to bring that data into a single place so they could be reported against. What we're going to talk about here is reporting is one aspect of what the Common Data Service really wants to light up. We believe measure, act, and automate. Power BI, PowerApps, Flow, lighting up that entire ecosystem is the future, right? The future of business productivity. You've heard about digital transformation. These are the components that you can enable by adopting the Common Data Service. So we'll talk about that in some detail. We have 3 main pillars of what we're going after. The first is we want to be your focal point for data. We want to do all that heavy lifting to bring your data together from across multiple systems so you can be building your Power BI reports to get insight, PowerApps to drive action, and flows to do your business process automations. We'll take care of that. We will include in our service all the infrastructure and code necessary to tie and integrate disparate islands of data so you can then go and build and manage applications. So we'll spend some time talking about PowerApps as well as the SDK, but we want to be a great place for you to build those. And again, an application that acts on a single end-to-end view of data is going to be much more powerful than 3 different applications over the different islands of data, right? You can have better insights, take better action, and more accurate action as well. You're not waiting for that nightly job to move something across, right? Real-time insights on your data. So you bring your data together, you build apps on top of that. The beauty here is it just works with the rest of Microsoft. The Common Data Service engineering team is doing the work to integrate the Common Data Service and the data within with PowerApps and Flow and Power BI, a big part of this conference. We're working with the Graph team. We're talking with the Azure Data Factory and the data warehousing teams from SQL. So we will do those integrations for you so you don't have to spend that time developing those solutions. I mean, these are things that are coming on our roadmap, of course. It's not all here and now, but that's our goal. We'll take care of all of that out of the box so you're able to build the apps and use those components. So focal point for data, great place to build apps, and whatever you have here just works with the rest of Microsoft. Just a slightly deeper look at each of these. Going back to those conversations we had with a lot of our partners, ISVs, and customers, the world kind of looked like this without CDS. You would integrate your app with another app or another service. And then if you wanted, you'd have to pull in data from Dynamics 365 for operations or AX. You'd have to bring in data from Dynamics 365 for sales, for customer data. And then you'd have to bring in identities so you can know which employees are working with those customers to ship that inventory. And if you wanted to somehow go and figure out email and all those events, you'd have to tie those in as well. You were doing the point-to-point integration, the work to bring that data together so that your app could build on that. What we're trying to do is change that picture. We're saying we will take care of that for you, right? We will bring together all that data. We will be your focal point for your data, and your app simply integrates here. So will actually work, and we're in the process of doing this right now, to integrate data from across your sales and operations. The first of many is prospect to cash. From a sales lead, an opportunity, all the way through to invoice paid, the whole deal is closed. That type of end-to-end view over business data was never actually shipped by Microsoft before. That's the first scenario we're going after. But you can see, providing an end-to-end means that your analytics, the insights you're deriving, are more complete. You can take better action over that data. Next is building and managing apps. We have solutions for the whole spectrum of people, depending on the type of apps you want to build. And we'll talk about that in a little more depth in a second, but suffice it to say, PowerApps is available for low-code, no-code development, rapid app development. Gartner calls that the citizen developer, right? I want to point and click and drag and drop. We also have an entire team within our group that's building the C# SDK. Satya, a month ago at the Business Forward event in New York, announced our talent application suite. Those are apps that Microsoft ships built on the same SDK that we're providing our customers. So full-blown multi-tenant SaaS applications built over top of CDS. And the other part is we have a security substrate that lets you set security policies that are applied to all the applications that run here. Going back to that other picture with the islands of data, you'd have to stitch together how your HR, your finance, all the different places, what policies came together, how did they give you more access, less access. With CDS being right in the middle, you set your policy once and everything adheres to it. So that's another part. You build your apps here, you manage your apps here. And the last part, you built your apps here, you manage your apps here, it works with the rest of Microsoft. And this is the key part. The way that this works is we have our policies and we evaluate them. So a user in PowerApps, a user in Flow, a user in Power BI, they'll automatically see the same data. So it's not only consistent, but we're guaranteeing that security. And as I mentioned before, we're doing the work to expose data through Graph. So in the coming months, you'll see Common Data Service data light up through Graph. And vice versa. And we'll talk about this in a sec. But we're integrating Office productivity data into the Common Data Service. So things like events, emails, documents, tasks, contacts, those are part of your business process. I interact with a customer, right? I want to know how many of these emails have happened, how much time have we spent. Those kinds of questions right now, you'd have to reach across multiple islands of data to figure that out. We're going to integrate that all for you together in the Common Data Service, and you're just building apps on top of that now. You're not spending time doing the integration work. Did those just blink? They did, right? Okay, good. Sometimes it doesn't fire, so I don't know. Anyways, so a closer look at what the Common Data Service is. This is just a build-up slide with some of the pieces to give you a better feel for how this all comes together. So there is the Common Data Service, the box in the cloud. At the core of it is the Common Data Model. So a lot of folks kind of go, well, is this just a table? Aren't you just SQL? No. We have data, absolutely. We have rows, but we talk entities because there's business logic on top of that. There's security associated with that, right? And so at the core of it is our Common Data Model with entities. We ship at this point 110-ish entities out of the box. They're what we believe to probably be the most commonly used across business, customers, cases, but you can absolutely add your own. So as a customer, you can add your own or extend the ones we gave you. Apps that you use on CDS can also deploy their own. It's a fully extensible data model at the core. And the beauty here is that's what powers everything. Security model sits on top of that. So this is the policies, right? Jono should be able to see customers in this region, but not that region, or sales opportunities, or fill in the blank, whatever policies you want. It's all defined in the security model and consistently applied to every app that uses it, going to that promise of simplifying your management experience. Something we're GAing in literally the next 2 weeks is our data integrator component. You're going to ask, what's the difference between integration and sync? We don't want to use the S word, so we say integrator. There's a couple realities of where we are. We're scenario focused to start, the prospect to cache, but this will become, and in this summer you will see a preview of general purpose data import. So you're a Power BI audience, how many folks have used Get Data and Power Query to do mashups and get that? That same technology we are SaaSifying and putting into our service, that's how you will get data from the rest of the world. So you will go into the Common Data Service. Dynamics 365, we know how to bring in, and we will do that for you. Same for Office 365. But maybe you're not using Microsoft CRM. I don't know why you wouldn't be, but you might not. You can bring that data in. You can connect to that CRM in the cloud, or a different ERP system, or a SQL server. It's really common to have Excel spreadsheets, as you guys know, from bringing together data for Power BI. All those are now data sources for Microsoft via the Common Data Service. Dynamics 365, Office 365, and those external systems. So you can bring all of that in. That comes in via the data integrator component. Next part, let's build apps on top of that. We've got that spectrum. We've got the PowerApps for the simpler, low-code, no-code drag-drop experience. We've got the SDK for your full-blown pro dev experience. And there's actually a middle ground we'll talk about later where you can power up your Power App as well. So you can have a nice middle using PowerApps as your front end and the SDK and the CDS as your full Power Pro Dev backend. And finally, the It Just Works. That Power BI, the flow, so intelligence and automation, that knows how to use a CDS out of the box. You don't have to write code for that. If you go to Flow, you say data source, you say common data service, your data is just there. Same with Power BI. They show up right away based on the data modeling you do. So those are just things that we're taking care of for you, right? These things come out of the box with the common data service. All right, moving forward into sort of where we're at. Going along those three pillars again, just to reiterate, common data model is at the heart of the common data service. We've got 110-ish entities. I keep wanting to say 120. I don't know why, but I think it's 110. They come with those out of the box. We call those standard entities. Again, you can completely extend those, add to your own. We also provide a bunch of actually ISO standard pick lists or enumerations, and you can extend those as well. And so a lot of flexibility there. One of the features I want to call out here is what we call field groups. So with the common data service, again, at the core of it's the data model, you're spending time modeling that, much like you do with Power Query, right? In Power Query, you're dragging and dropping to define what the data model looks like. Conceptually, you do that with the common data service as well, where you define your entities, relationships, your lookups, all those different things. One of the other things we really believe is because you're shaping the data model, you know best how that entity, how that data should surface in an app, at least to start. And so that's the concept of field groups. When you create your entity, our customer has about 100, oh, that's what it is. Customer, I think, has 120 fields. You don't want to see all of those when you see it in a list or tabular form. You probably need 7. When you're doing edit, you probably only really need to edit the core 30, right? These are things that when you're shaping that entity, you get to decide. You create a field group around that. And when PowerApps fires up, it respects those. There is a default list, a view, and an edit. And so the person that's going and creating that no-code app, they're 60% of the way there just by dragging and dropping that control in, instead of having to figure out of the 120 fields in customer, which one do I care about when I list? And granted, you can customize that. You can change whatever fields show up. But our goal there is, I always call it the 70% rule. Let's get you 70% of the way, the last 30 is on you. And so this is one way to do that. And the other part is it's shared across your company. Because it's the data model, every app that's built on it can leverage that information. And so there will be an announcement, I think in like an hour and a half, where there's a bunch of new controls coming out for PowerApps that also consume that. So again, just more and more things across Microsoft leveraging that metadata, and that will be exposed as well, so for SDK apps.
Absolutely. Yeah, it will.
So that's the common data model. Data integration. Just to break this down a little more succinctly, there's three parts to this problem for us. The first is, embarrassingly enough, Dynamics 365, although we say it's one family, is actually 3 separate islands of data. We've got sales, or sales customer engagement, we've got operations, and we've got NAV, financials. We've done nothing for the customer to bring that data together so you can reason over it. That's where we're starting. The prospect to cache is the first scenario. We're out of the box. We will integrate your data for you. If you have those services, it's 3 clicks. We'll pull that data in the common data service. You have an aggregated view end-to-end across your business process. And we, over the months, will continue to add all of the master and reference data from both of those services and bring it in the common data service for you. Now you can build apps on top of that. You can extend those services. You can leverage that data, add your own information, build apps on top. So that's kind of priority 1. In parallel, we're bringing Office data in. We met with a company who ships software for time management for their staff, right? Clock in, clock out, those kind of things. A lot of their comments were, yeah, I do a lot to bring the data together from Office, and I schedule events and do things, but that's not my core business. Those are artifacts I create to help manage the business process. That's exactly the problem we want to solve for you. We don't want you to have to spend the time doing core plumbing. Things like an HR meeting or performance review, right? The invite on the calendar is the thing that's used to coordinate. The real process is the fact that the review happened. And so the integrations we're doing let you just deal with your business process here, instantiate an object called event, and magically all that stuff is taken care of because we know in the meeting in the performance review there were 2 participants. That should equal automatically 2 attendees in the meeting. So these are the kinds of integrations we're doing So your apps can now span from business process and include productivity. Another one that's pretty popular is documents. When I have a marketing campaign that does include everything from the actual PDFs, that I need to print out, a variety of Excel spreadsheets, your business process is the campaign. The documents, the attachments, those are artifacts that support it. And so we want to make it all part of one data model. So you just deal with the common data service. So that's Office productivity, and then finally third-party data. So if folks here use the Get Data experience, there's about 72 of what we call the connectors to different services. Those 72 are the same 72 we will start with. We are working with the same team. It's the same infrastructure, except like I said, we're SaaSifying it. We're bringing it to the web. But that's our infrastructure for reaching out and bringing in data, allowing you guys to do mashups. So the same mashups you can do a desktop today, you can do for common data service. Just a quick drill down on this because it's come up a couple times. Prospect to cash, that's the first scenario. It GAs in a week. I've now committed us to it by saying it here. The data from Dynamics 365 for sales and operations, right? What we've basically done is we act as the middle piece that pulls data from both sides. We know what this looks like, so we actually shape your data model in flight, right? Now you have that aggregated view in the common data service. Two caveats that are worth calling out. It actually came up yesterday in the App in a Day session as well. When you sync data in, there's that S word, when you bring that data in, it's read-only. Now, people in this room who are dealing with the moving data back and forth know all the complexities about multi-master, right, distributed transactions, all of that. We're absolutely going to tackle that. We just had to start somewhere. So right now, the data that's brought in from external systems is read-only. So you can still extend this, right? You can associate other data with it. You can extend those entities and data. And then we're working, as we speak right now, on the read-write pattern. And so from a Power BI point of view, that's probably actually an okay starting place, because in most situations, right, the Power BI reports and analytics you're doing are read-only against that. You want to dig into it, do filtered views, all of that. That doesn't require read-write. But that's something we're adding in the course of the next quarters here, support for full read-write. And again, prospect to cash was one specific named one we started with that helped us validate that we built the right thing in terms of infrastructure. And we're adding the next scenarios in short order. Getting to building apps with CDS is where Peter's about to get teed up. So I spoke to a sort of a spectrum of support for different skill levels for building applications. If you bear with me here from left to right, yes, left to right, we'll start with PowerApps, low code, no code, your citizen developer. These are folks that want to point and click. And going back to that field group concept, if they can not even have to decide what the right set of fields to show is for a list versus the details, like they're even happier, right? So that they're really what we're targeting with that 70%. By just dragging and dropping, you're going to hear about data grids and gallery controls. It's already there. It's not pretty, but that's that last 30%, right? They're not having to decide what about the data is interesting. PowerApps powered up. That was that one I was alluding to, where PowerApps doesn't natively support things like transactions, which is a key concept in business applications, right? When you create a sales order, there's a bunch of different artifacts that have to come together. So what you can do is you can deploy an Azure function that was announced last year at Build with your logic using the SDK. Yep. And PowerApps can call into those Azure functions via custom API. And so you can now continue to use PowerApps as your front end, right? Your mobile development, tablet or phone, and then use that back end for all your complex logic. So that kind of gives you an ability to up the level of complexity in the business logic in your app. And then the last two, rich client apps and web SaaS apps, basically Xamarin, another technology we have for building mobile applications. We support that as well. You can use our SDK. Right now, we only have the C# SDK. Peter will talk more about where we're going with this in a moment, but you just deploy a middle tier. You host that middle tier, and Xamarin can call into it. And same with that web SaaS app approach. That's the talent apps we have, the onboarding, the interviewing. So you can deploy that web front end using our C# SDK and interact with the common data service under the hood. So kind of across that spectrum, depending on what type of program and application you're trying to build, we have support for that. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I want to get to the SDK, but just kind of going back to that PowerApps, the low code, no code, the Common Data Service is an absolute first-class data source for PowerApps. We meet with them literally every day. We build into PowerApps, right? And our goal is that we have a fantastic citizen developer-oriented application platform with PowerApps on top of the CDS. One of the features we released recently, we called it experimental. I'm not sure why that versus preview or beta, but it is entity forms. And that allowed you, with 3 drags and 3 clicks, to create a list view which application, which is very common for a lot of like factory floors, right? Or sort of your logistical apps. What do I have to do? Go and take a look at that detailed view, execute on it. And so Entity Forms was the first of many of these. Like I said, a blog post is coming out later this afternoon where we're introducing 3 more. Gallery views, data grids. We'll continue to grow this library of these controls that are smarter because they're consuming the common data service and the data, the metadata in it.
Yeah, so notice how powerful this is. Many of you know from operations that we are very metadata centric, and we've taken that thinking over to CDS as well. So before you had to position a field here, position a field there, and so on. If you go back to what we're used to in our space, we're used to just saying, I want these fields, and then let the system figure it out for you. And that's exactly where we're going with these forms that Jono talked about. And we'll add more and more to that. We'll do one-to-N relationships so that they can be shown more easily. We're building this whole thing, so it literally is drag and drop in one operation, and you are done. Yep. And it works. It really does.
I'm going to stop actually here for 1 second and tie this back to, well, first of all, this is the Data Insights Summit. You guys are, well, a lot of you are analysts looking at data, and probably asking that question, okay, but I have PQ, I have M in desktop. Why would I care about the common data service? And that's completely fair. I got that question about 5 times this morning. The reality is I don't know if we mentioned it this morning at the keynote, the mantra, measure, act, automate. That is what our division lives by. Measure is Power BI. You find the things you need to act on, right? Act is PowerApps. Go and do something. And then finally, automate, flow, right? Business process automation, automate those things, automate notifications. If you're just building in Power BI, the same PQM experience, you're building your data model, but it's stuck there in the report. You can't then go use that same data model, the logic you've built around it, to go power action and automation. So think of this as being a way to push that data model one level lower. So now your businesses, your customers, yourselves, you can measure, act, automate. So that's the shift, right? If you want to enable that subsequent action, if you want to do notifications over top that data, the work you do to shape the data model in Power BI Desktop today, that task can just happen in the common data service. Now you have a rich platform, an app platform, not only to build the Power BI reports, because again, it just works out of the box. You can build the same reports against the common data service that you could directly from desktop, but now you have a platform for that citizen developer, the pro dev apps, all of that to happen. And so if you're looking at these migration projects of what am I going to do, it's worth thinking about that and say, yes, okay, I get that. I don't have to take on another dependency. But if you kind of see that the next turn of the crank, oh, just past that horizon, is the act, is the automate, you can do this once in the common data service, and those other tools just light up for you. And that, for sure, has been the big point. It's a wow factor for a lot of the folks that we talk with, right? It's, oh, right, when they do want to act and automate, now what am I going to do? By doing the data modeling in the common data service, you're able to enable that self-serviceness right out of the box. All right, some pretty pictures of PowerApps. Oh, wow. But what I really want to get to is, let's talk about the SDK real quick. And for that, here's Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, so the SDK, we are just right now, finishing a private preview for that. But what it allows you to do is to build real apps on the data in CDS, integrate with CDS in a richer way. So Jono has given you a picture which is accurate, where you have sort of consider a lake, and you have lots of streams coming into the lake, the data that comes in using M and whatever, you have a lot of connectors there. And then the other side of the lake, there is data coming out of it in Power BI, in Flow, in PowerApps, whatever it is. But at some point, we have to do something with that data. We have to create that invoice from the sales order. We have to do some aggregation of the data and so on. Some business logic has to happen on that data, and that's where the SDK comes in. Now, the SDK that we were talking about here really serves 2 purposes. One is that it allows you to do CRUD operations on your data, of course. And the other thing is that the data model can manage itself through this and can describe itself using the SDK. So we can now actually access the metadata that describes all the entities and pick lists and forms and field groups and all that good stuff there. Now, the SDK that we're talking about today is the one that we have been using internally for a while to build interesting apps. We have the talent engagement app. When was that being published now, right?
Yeah, it just hit public preview last week.
Last week, right? Yep. So that was something where we engaged with that team, and we had a lot of fruitful cooperation there. Easy to say now, of course, but yeah, where we you know, that they had an influence on what we did, and we told them how to use the SDK. So that was an interesting time there. Yeah. So also Jonah talked about Azure Functions, and as it happens, that seems to be a perfect marriage to the SDK. It's possible to put code that does something on the SDK there. We have built templates that allow you to leverage that. And that means that you can access the business logic that you have there through simple HTTP requests. Now, they can come certainly from PowerApps, but they can come from anywhere you want. They can come from any sort of integration scenario that you want. So I really see this as a marriage made in heaven. It's pretty cool stuff. So let's see. So what can it do? Well, it can do data access over entities. And I'll show you what these entities look like in a few minutes. As I said, it also accesses metadata. And it supports data triggers. So one of the things that you may want to do is to say, okay, I know I have all this data floating around here, but really I want to know when something changes there. I want to know when somebody creates a sales order in CDS, because I want to do some integration with a bespoke system, or I want to store it in my data warehouse, or I want to do something else with it. So what we are doing is we're setting up a system where you can register for being called when something interesting happens with your data. So that's a more passive role where you're actually just notified when things happen in your data. And you can do that as a fire and forget, which is what we call notification, or you can do that within a transaction scope, which is then called a trigger. So I'm going to talk to you mainly today about the C# SDK. That's what I'm going to be showing in a few minutes. And what the SDK is not just a set of classes that you can call and that's it. Really, it's much more a domain language that's built into C# using the advanced features of C#, and you'll see that. It uses the whole gamut of lambdas, asyncs, vars, all the stuff that, all the innovations that C# has done over the last few years is leveraged to good purpose in our SDK. So, you know, how many of you know LINQ, Language Integrated Query? Just a few of you. Well, we sort of like to use internally the term BLINQ, Business Language Integrated Query, just because it's cool, but we haven't actually done the analysis of trademarks and so on. So
just don't hold us to it.
Yeah, don't hold us to that. So, yeah, we'll not go into that last one right now, unless somebody asks for it. I wanted to show the architecture of what it looks like. It's a little bit busy slide. Does it have a pointer here? Yeah, but you can't see it. Anyway, so here are your applications that run with the SDK. They are out here. In this case, we showed browser applications, but they can be any application at all. The important thing is that the SDK is in play here, right? So what happens is that this mysteriously talks to the runtime endpoint on the server. Now, how does this happen? Well, that's the whole core pivot. The whole pivot in this sense, probably this room means something else.
Yeah. Good catch, though.
Thanks. So that's the important part of this. So what happens is, when a program using the SDK runs, at runtime it builds a tree in JSON, a document in JSON. That document is sent over the wire to this endpoint. The endpoint looks at it and says, oh, that's interesting, that's a query. Let me deserialize it, build some data structures, and then do the data access over here. So this JSON that flows in through this here can come from anywhere. It can be C#, it can be JavaScript. We have a JavaScript SDK coming up that we're building right now. But you know what, if you have a smartwatch or something that doesn't support that sort of very complicated APIs, you can just build it in a string and send the JSON document over the wire. It's just as good. So the actual intelligence that's in the SDK is quite limited. And what we will do is we will make sure that people can build SDKs in other languages and other frameworks and other platforms to their heart's content, because we'll put this on GitHub and tell people how to work with that. Another interesting thing here, you'll notice down here, I wonder why it shows.
It's not a touchscreen, right?
It looks good anyway. Anyway, so you'll notice out here we have the SQL thing, Azure SQL, but the SDK that we're building is not confined to a relational model. So business people, they like to think about tables with rows and columns and so on, and we certainly support that, and that's one of the main scenarios, but it's not the only scenario. We also provide will provide document DB, but even today, we also work with graph databases that are able to maintain trillions of nodes, and then you can walk the nodes and do interesting information like that. And that's also part of the SDK. So the SDK is storage agnostic, which is an interesting point. There's also blob storage for videos and all sorts of other good stuff. So this was the trigger and notification slide. This is the CDM service, Common Data Service. Whenever something happens, an event goes in there. It's across the network here. It's deserialized, it's unpacked. And what ends up happening is that your functionality is called there. And then you can send back CRUD commands and so on. It's just this loop that I wanted to show you. This more passive mode of working. Yes, sir? Yeah, so why don't we just go ahead and do some demo here. Could you take 8, please?
Yep.
There you go. Okay, so
You're good.
let's start with showing this repository of the metadata that we have to describe all the entities. So Jono had a little problem knowing if it was 120 or 110. The right number is 105.
105.
105.
Okay.
So we have 105 entities in
We'll
here.
fix that next week.
And we are certainly working to get any number of these. Right now, these entities represent things that you would be likely to encounter in ERP systems. But you can build your own, certainly. I just wanted for this discussion, well, let me just dig into one of them. What the hell? So here you have your fields, your field groups, the keys, and the relationships. And we even have a way of looking at the data that goes in each and every one of these, which won't really impress you so much. You thought there were none there, right? Yeah, but there it is. But let me go back here and do product. You'll notice that we have product and product category. We will need this in a few minutes, so just wanted to show you that they are represented here. Okay, so why don't we geek out here? How many of you know C#? Come on. A little bit. Okay, well.
Enough to be dangerous. That's the answer usually, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me.
Okay, so why don't we just run this little app and let's see what happens here. So I built myself a little console app for you guys. So it's not complex, no web going on here, it's just a console app. Let me just start this. So the first thing that goes on here is that we are asked for our credentials. Remember, Jono had this box where he had the CDS, and on top of it there was an authentication layer, and there was also authorization, by the way.
Yep.
But the authentication means that you can only talk to this data if you are duly registered as being able to do so. And that's an important point, because that applies towards all your data. Irrespective of how you choose to access your data, you always have to provide your credentials. And this is no exception. So let me sign in there. And hopefully in a few seconds, there I am. So what I have here is a client, and the client is your gateway to the wonderful world of CDS SDK. With that in hand, you can do all your CRUD operations. So let's do a simple insert here. Let me just resize this a little bit. There. So first of all, a few points here. Notice that the product category that we just talked about, I just showed you that, right? Product, you remember that. That was only 15 seconds ago, so you remember.
Yes.
Yes. Right. So you use them here as normal C# objects, what we call POCOs. They're just POCOs like anything else. There's no magic here. There's no big complicated thing. They really are just C# classes with fields on them. That's all there is to it. It's extremely simple. And you can instantiate them like we see here. There, another one. Then we create what's known as an executor. Now, you will notice that executors do the actual work. So the actual insertion will only happen when this guy is execute async happens. So nothing happens here except for us queuing up these records in a nice little package that will be sent to the server when this thing executes. Now this means that the heavy lifting of actually inserting this in a data store happens on the server and within a transaction that you cannot control. The transaction happens at this call here. You don't have to deal with transactions yourself. So you can do inserts, queries, deletions, everything like that in an executor, and then you execute, and magic happens for you. So transactions are not something that you have to deal with. And this was a very crucial point because we know from our previous work in AX operations that people very often don't handle transactions very well. They do very long transactions. So let's just do this. So insert them and boom. Another thing to notice, did you notice the await keyword there? What does that mean? Anyone? No, await is one of those nice features that C# has introduced for us. It's amazing. The way this works is truly amazing from a language perspective. But what this means is that whenever this executes, it's a non-blocking call. So it'll say, go execute this, but return immediately to the caller. And whenever this is done, continue with where you were. Which means that you give up the thread to somebody else doing work, which is part of the reason why we are so scalable. We scale really, really well. We never use blocking calls. Every call is an asynchronous call. And that's really a crucial design point that we have here. Stepping in. So let's do this. Now let's do a query. We inserted some stuff, now let's do a query. Start by doing a query builder. And then let's build a query. So this is a query for product categories that have the name electronics sorted by category ID. And what we want is the category ID, the name, and the description. So this would be select category ID, comma name, comma description, order by category ID where name equals electronics if you are in a SQL world. Right? Okay. So notice a few things here. What's going on here? Yeah, but it's a lambda. It's a lambda expression, right? You will know this from LINQ as well if you've used LINQ extensively. This is a lambda expression, and this is really a function, but it's never executed. This function is just passed to the server as this document. So it's interpreted at runtime. A tree is built for it. That tree is sent over to the server. I won't go into it. It's fascinating stuff, but maybe not so interesting just at this point. But I can talk about it.
If you ever do want to talk about this,
I can talk about it for hours, man. I really can. Okay, so let's build ourselves another BAX executor. This time we're doing a .query instead of .insert. And then again, we do the execute async. And now we can do the query result, and we can just return a normal IEnumerable instance, and we can just, there was only one, and I'm sure that somewhere here you will see electronics. I don't know if that's visible or not. But the queries do work. Continuing on. So let's see, here we are getting the Surface or phone categories. We're doing, we're executing, we're looping through them, and then we're adding each record to another executor with .delete. Again, nothing has happened so far. Okay, but as soon as we go down here,
goodbye.
This keyboard is not good for this sort of thing. Goodbye data, it's all gone. And then some bookkeeping. But anyway, that's about all I wanted to show for now. I can go into this in great detail. I'm not going to. Let's go back.
Yes. Okay. So just kind of getting through here to the last couple things. Security. We talked about this before. I'm going to try and walk and talk and switch at the same time. There's a couple different levels of security in the Common Data Service. The most, or the least granular, I suppose, thank you, is at the database level. You can decide who can access the database at all. Within that, you can have table or object conceptually level, that's entities, and then we've introduced record level security as well recently. So you can create policies based off of business units, hierarchies. You know, people should be able to see sales orders from this region. You know, if you're a manager role, these are the kinds of things that we're supporting in the Common Data Service, which are common across a bunch of business application domains. And so there's a variety of preview programs starting up right now, and you can absolutely get into those. There's an email address at the end here that we can get for you. The last topic is it just works. So you're all here for a Power BI conference, so I want to make sure we talk about how Power BI actually looks against the Common Data Service. At the core of this is what we call a perspective. So field groups were how you could define for an entity what fields are interesting, customer name, location, or something. Perspectives are one level higher. You can group entities. So, for example, financials perspective may have a bunch of entities that are germane for the financials area. Orders, customers, whatever those are. You can group these, right? You create those custom perspectives. That's how Power BI sees the data in the Common Data Service. And in about 2 seconds, I'm actually going to flip over to a demo here of how that actually looks. But suffice it to say, again, this is part of how you should think about creating a data model. The same way you define an entity, how should this show up in Power BI? How should that show up when you're building applications? So can you guys see this okay? This is the PowerApps portal. Peter showed the same thing. The two things I wanted to show in here are the perspectives. So right now this is in preview, but you can create a custom perspective grouping what, oh yeah, right, because there's a limit of 5, so I've exceeded that in the demo. But you can create these perspectives that allow you to group entities that are interesting. And the place you consume those is desktop. Power BI Desktop. So in the same way you go get data today from other services, you go get data, online services. Common Data Service is a beta connector right now. You need to, like Peter mentioned, authenticate and get authorized to the Common Data Service. So you should only see the environments you have access to. I happen to have access to a lot. This particular one is the one I want to use though for the demo. And so I'm going to go into here. And what we've now done is we've said, okay, Jono wants to go and look at PBI demo environment. And we'll interrogate Common Data Service for all of, the perspectives that are available to me. So it happens to be that 10 of these came out of the box. They're standard for the objects that we ship. And 5 of them were the ones that you saw in the portal on the other side here. You can see sales order line is the last one in that list. And you can see sales order line, I know, there it is, right in the middle, sorry. The display names and everything are set slightly differently. But anyhow, in this case, I'm just going to use sales orders, one of the ones we ship out of the box. Again, the goal is you've helped the report creator figure out what entities are interesting to start. And so you can see on the right-hand side, the entities were pulled down. Their model is tables in the model itself, but you're able to interact with this exactly the same as if it was a SQL Azure table or an Excel spreadsheet. The example we always like to use, I used to own custom visualizations for Power BI, so I always use the custom vises. But you have billing address by country. Where are you? Country. And we're going to do sales amount. And so it's doing direct query. So you guys are familiar with direct query, how that goes, grabs the data, and total amount. So it's real-time interactions against the Common Data Service. The same data set that PowerApps can be acting on right at this moment. Come on, Globe. So you can just see, the sample data is thin. But the point being is that same data set in real time can be accessed by Power BI for those insights, immediately transition into Power Apps for a Power App that was built, or an SDK, or a flow notification to trigger. That's one of those powerful points again. When you're just building a Power BI model, it's stuck in Power BI. Applications can't work against that. You model that in the Common Data Service, the relationships, the entities. Now the entire ecosystem of the Microsoft Business Plat can light up against that. And it's all real time against that same data set. So real time measure, act, and automate. So I just need to get through a couple more quick things and then we'll totally take questions here. Flow, we talked about Flow being the automation tool from Microsoft. This is really geared towards everyone from your end user, that citizen developer, the same kind of person that wants to drag and drop apps. Flow is for automating your business processes. There is absolutely a pro dev version. It's called Logic Apps. That's for your true EAI. When you're doing hardcore data movement with orchestration, we have an option for that too. But Flow is really kind of that left side of the picture. Your citizen developer, your drag and drop. Folks in this room are probably very familiar with Excel. We get a lot of asks saying, you know what, I just want to do data entry with Excel. We have an app for that too. It's actually an add-in, but anyways. You can fire up from the portal an Excel add-in, shows you all the data in that entity. You can copy, paste, delete, manage your data that way. So for folks familiar with Excel spreadsheets, that's another way to interact with the Common Data Service. And the Outlook add-in. This, it hurts me, but this is one of our least invested in areas, but I think one of the most powerful parts. Think of this as, we are going to let your users interact with their business data and processes from within the apps they use every day, right? From a salesperson's point of view, a marketing person, when I receive an email from a customer who wants to order something, I should just be able to trigger the sales order from Outlook right there. I should know who the customer is. That way I can attribute the order to a customer ID, and that thing should get created. So the Outlook add-in, we started with just the contacts for now. We're adding case and products and everything later. But when you get an email, you can see, is this person a contact in my common data service? So you're able to now manage that address book. We're integrating all of this, like I mentioned before, with Office 365. So all your contacts from Office 365 are now fully applicable to your business domain as well, right? So that's something we're adding to really light up more value there. But over time, you will see more and more come into this Outlook add-in, and for custom processes as well. You should be able to build a little app that runs in Outlook that does your custom business process, whatever that happens to be, right? That's something we really want to have for you. So the waning moments here, because we're now going yellow, timeline-wise, we ship every 2 weeks. That's something that you probably heard from Power BI as well, right? Our VP, James Phillips, says ship, ship, ship. So we do. That's why our timelines are this quarter and then beyond this quarter, because we really run that fast. Half of it also is what you need. So my ask for folks in this room, you'll see an email address on the next slide. We'll be here for a bit. If there's things here that sound interesting, things that are missing that would make it viable, let us know. We plan monthly, we ship weekly, right? So in Q3, the focal point for data, we talked about data integration. So we'll bring in data from what we used to call AX and CRM, we now call sales and operations. We're also adding hundreds of entities in the next months here. We're also going to introduce the general purpose data integration. Again, if you chose another CRM product that's not Microsoft's, that's okay, we still love you. You can bring that data in from there.
But less.
He said it, not me, just remember that. No, but yes. And then the other part is bringing data from Graph into CDS and vice versa, exposing common data service through the Graph. So if you're already building applications on Graph, the data is available there as well. That's really our goal, one Microsoft from a pro developer point of view. Next, easy app creation. All that good stuff in PowerApps, that 70% solution, right? Making it super quick and easy for that citizen developer to get most of their work done. We'll continue to ship those month over month. We're adding business logic. Vegeta's not here, a PM on my team. The poor guy has been trying so long to get business logic in, and we're finally getting that through. So you can do things like validation, defaulting. We'll be adding support for things like triggers and actions, really making the common data service a business app platform, right? You need that there, we're putting it in. We have the preview of the SDK launching very shortly, right, Peter?
Yep, absolutely.
And then we also have security in preview right now. You will see all of that GA in the coming quarter. We're also adding better support for auditing, right? Who changed what? Who's using what? Those are the kinds of things CIOs need to have a trustworthy platform. And finally, it just works with the rest of Microsoft. What you saw with Power BI integration, that's in preview right now. We're looking to GA probably in the next quarter. Functionally, it's fully there. It's COGS optimizations from our point of view. So if you're interested, on that note, it will GA in post Q3. And as I mentioned before, CDS data being exposed to the Graph is a target for us. Last topic, with 1 minute and 37 seconds to spare, pricing, because this is where things always get sticky. Let me put it this way. You have to create a CDS to use a CDS. Like that seems pretty logical, right? It boils down to the following. You need a PowerApps P2 license today to create the CDS. You only need one. That P2 license lets you create 2 databases, usually like a pre-prod prod. That's the pattern we see, right? Integration, dev, whatever you want to call that. You create with that P2 license, and every other person who's using PowerApps, Flow, the CDS, only needs the P1. Put it another way, you pay the 40 bucks once, and then everything else is $7. There's also, let me put this out there, a trial you can sign up for, which is absolutely free. So there's no reason to not be at least starting and trying this out. We are working on a lot more options, like including these licenses in Office 365 and Dynamics 365. So you'll see more distribution channels for how to get access to CDS. But for right now, you need a P2 to create. You just need one. And then everyone can use a P1. And that's it with 30 seconds to go.
Absolutely.
So this is the email address. If anything in here was A, interesting, B, confusing, C, you really want to use, this is your email address to hit. Sabine gets all the emails, so if you go bug him. But absolutely, I appreciate your guys' time. If questions, please feel free to ask.
Another thing you could do is go to www.powerapps.com to get started on CDS. It's free, it's great, it's a good story. Go figure it out.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job, guys.